Well, imagine with me for just a moment that you are in the six final hours of your life here on planet Earth. And the question becomes, what would you want to tell your family members and your friends? What would you want to leave behind? What kind of lasting message would you like to give to them? Well, that's exactly the situation we find Jesus in here in the Final Words series. It's his last 6 hours on earth in a human form. And he has something very specific he wants to get across to his followers, not only in that day, but for you and me as well. Six highly significant, important messages or concepts or themes that he wants you and I to live by. There has always been a lot of interest in the last words of a dying person. Family members and friends lean close to catch even a glimpse of what they might say in those last hours here on planet Earth. As a pastor, I've been at many bedsides watching families want to know what's important to the person who is no longer going to be with us. And that is never more true than in the final words of Jesus on the cross in those last 6 hours. We strain to hear what's important to him, what's significant, what does he want us to know? Because these statements, these words are incomparable in their significance to you and to me. They summarize all of his life and his teaching. Now remember, immediately following his first words of forgiveness to the soldiers who were crucifying him on the cross and to the two criminals, the thieves that accompanied him to that cross, the third word is a word of comfort. It's a word of consolation. First to his mother, Mary. It's been said that there is no greater love than the love between a mother and her child. There's a certain tenderness, an intimacy, a care, a warmth involved in that kind of relationship. And here is Mary, and she is standing there, and he is hanging there on the cross, and she is completely helpless. So Jesus looks down upon her, and he says these words. John writes for us in chapter 19, verse 25, these words. Now keep in mind that John is there as well. John is his closest earthly associate. He is his beloved, and he is an eyewitness to this, and he is standing next to Mary. And so John writes in chapter 19, verse 25, these words. But standing by the cross of Jesus were his mother and his mother's sister, Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. Three women, three Marys. Mary, her sister Mary, and Mary from the town of Magdala up there in Galilee. Luke tells us that she was the first one running out to the tomb on the resurrection day to see Jesus. Now, keep in mind that the earthly father of Jesus, Joseph, is no longer alive. The last time we see him is when Jesus is 12 years old and he is teaching in the temple. So here now at 33, Joseph has died somewhere in that passage of time. So Mary is alone. She has watched her husband die, and now she is watching her son die. Now at this time, after the birth of a child, a mother was required to go to the temple where a priest would declare her purified and clean. So on the way to the temple, a man by the name of Simeon is waiting. Simeon is a devout Jew. He is waiting in Jerusalem for the coming of the Messiah, the Anointed One. And when he sees Mary, he cries out in a loud voice, what we call the Song of Simeon, the Nunc Dimittis. He cries out, this is the one who we have been waiting for, the consolation of Israel. He's here, I see him. He's in her arms, and he's coming this way. Now, in this Song of Simeon, he offers up a prophecy about Jesus and a praise about Jesus and the Messiah, the coming of this Christ one. But then he offers some chilling words to Mary herself. Luke records these words in chapter 2, verse 35, where he looks at Mary and Simeon says to her, and a sword will pierce through your own soul also. He offers a prophecy that a sword will pierce her heart, that she will have great, overwhelming suffering in her life because of this child. And that suffering would be every bit as real as if an actual sword had pierced her heart. And here now it's taking place when her son is 33 years old. 33 years later from the prophecy of Simeon. It's now time. And she is watching her son in his mid-30s struggle for every single breath. And Mary is thinking, it's not supposed to end this way. There was so much joy and excitement over the birth of Jesus as the promised one, my son, the one that I took care of, that I wiped his runny nose and patched his scraped knees. This is my son, my son. It's not supposed to end this way. It's not supposed to happen this way. She's horrified. And there's nothing that she can do but wait and watch the events that take place. Have you ever felt like that? Why me? This isn't supposed to happen this way. This isn't what I signed up for in life, not in my marriage or in my career or with my kids or my health or my finances. It's not supposed to happen this way. Maybe you can identify in some way with what Mary is going through this very moment as she is watching not only her son, but the long-awaited promised one suffer to catch his very breath. The eyewitness report of John continues in chapter 19, verse 26, where John writes these words. When Jesus saw his mother and the disciple whom he loved standing nearby, he said to his mother, "Woman, behold your son." Now, there's a couple things that I want you to understand here. Remember now, John is an eyewitness to these events. He's writing down exactly what he saw and exactly what he heard. And the first thing that Jesus is saying here is, I understand you. I understand you. You recall that Mary had the angel Gabriel come to her to announce her pregnancy, the mystery of her pregnancy. She had to travel to her hometown of Bethlehem at the last stages of her labor pains, right before she gave birth. A bone-jarring, teeth-rattling journey on the back of a donkey while she's pregnant. And then there in Bethlehem, her contractions set in, the midwives are called, and over a period of time, she gives birth to this baby. And when she does, the midwives give this little child to her, and for the first time, she holds him in her arms. She raises him. She watched him grow up. She teaches him how to read and to write at home. She instructs him in the ways of the Old Testament laws and the prophets. And Joseph accompanies her. They're so proud of their young son. She tucks him into bed every night. And now she's watching her little boy die on a cross. And John now includes himself in the narrative. He said he saw his mother and the disciple whom he loved. The disciple whom he loved. What a title, my beloved. You are the one whom he loved. John was always at his side. He was the youngest. And here he includes himself in this eyewitness report. I was there. I saw the whole thing. I heard the whole thing. I want to share it with you. I want to tell you what happened. And he said to her, imagine, their eyes meet. He looks down from the cross. Now, keep in mind that it only takes an inch to kill a person. In those days, the Romans didn't have enough wood to make these elaborate tall crosses. They just had to get a person's body far enough off the ground that the feet couldn't touch the ground so that they could hang and suffocate to death. So you could look right into the eyes of a person who was being crucified. It only takes an inch to kill a man. And he sees her pain at this moment. Her heart is being pierced. He sees her deepest needs. He understands how fragile and delicate life can be. This is his mother. So he has a personal word for her. Now he calls her woman. He's disengaging. He's moving into the salvation process. And he says to her, here is your son, my beloved. Someone is going to take my place. It is my beloved. It is John. The two of you now belong to the ages together. Can you imagine that Jesus is dying for the sins of the whole world? He's filling out the final pages of the history of salvation. He's suffering on the cross, and he stops to look at our human need. He stops to give a word of comfort and consolation. I see and know and understand your loss. I understand your wounds. I understand your need for companionship in life. Woman, my beloved will become your beloved. He will become your son. Now, what I love about this is that Jesus is never too busy running the universe to stop and pay attention to you and me. He is fighting the greatest battle that's ever been fought in the history of the world, the battle for good and evil. At stake is your destiny and my destiny, your salvation and mine. But at that moment, when he looks down from the cross, his eyes meet her eyes, and he gives her a word of comfort. Jesus is at his best when we feel smallest and most helpless. John will now be your son. If you ever doubt that I love you, turn to John, and he will assure you, and he will tell you, and you can talk together about me. His final word of comfort begins with a word of understanding of where you and I are in our lives and where Mary and John were that day standing before the cross. And then John writes to us in verse 27, then he said to the disciple, behold your mother. And from that hour, the disciple took her to his home. I love this. Not only does Jesus understand us, but he provides for us. He turns and he sees John. He says, John, my mother will now be your mother. As she cared for me, she will care for you. And as I cared for you, you will care for her. The two people who loved him most stood side by side. Mary was losing her son, and John was losing his Lord. And they both belonged to him. And now they will belong to each other. As Mary held Jesus, so now shall she hold John. And they will both hold each other. But there's more. Jesus often provides for us by sending a person to us. This is one of the primary ways in which God provides for us and cares for us, by sending people to us. The times when God seems most distant and far away and we find ourselves in the darkness and we can't find our way out, those are the times when God often sends a loving person to us to walk alongside us and to be with us and to stand with us. That's why we talked about in this first message, life is all about relationship. And it's in relationship that we find comfort and consolation. And here we find that relationship between Jesus and between Mary and between John. Life is all about relationships. And I remember when I was 17 years old, God sent a young life leader, a youth worker into my life to change my life forever. I was struggling as an insecure high school kid. You know how the story goes. And didn't know where I was headed in life, didn't have a direction, sort of wandering around. And God provided, out of nowhere, this youth minister who came to me and befriended me and put his arm around me and over time introduced me to a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. Changed my life. And I wanted to be like that. And so I became a youth minister, and then I went to seminary and became a pastor, all because of God leading this individual into our life. God never wants us to stand alone. Never. We are not built to stand alone. He understands us, and he provides for us in these words of comfort. And so John describes what's taking place here by saying, from that moment on, if you listen carefully to this passage, he said, John took care of her. How did he take care of her? He took her home with him, back to the household of Zebedee in Galilee, and provided for her as if she were his mother. And she cared for him as if he were her child. What a beautiful image of this word of comfort that's taking place in this final word of Jesus. Not only does Jesus understand us, and not only does he provide for us, but when he provides for us, he provides for our every need. Isn't it interesting that this virus has brought the world to its knees so quickly? Isn't it interesting how easily life can get out of control with all of our technology and our government and our resources and our education, that this virus can bring the whole world to a screeching halt? It's amazing how fragile life can be. And Jesus understands how delicate our lives are and how delicate this world is. And he wants to remind us that he can provide for us in the midst of that. And not only that, but understand what a virus does. It isolates, it separates, it alienates us. It cuts us off from human relationship. And Jesus is saying here in his final words that life is all about relationship. There's a great analogy here of what a virus does. It forces us to quarantine, to isolate, to wear masks, to have social distancing, all things that we were not created to do. But when a virus attacks us, it separates and isolates us. It's a tremendous relational and spiritual and emotional metaphor for when life breaks down in the world around us and in our lives. When it breaks down, we get separated and we get isolated. And all of us know what that isolation feels like. How would you like to live our whole lives under a virus? Well, in some ways, we do. We live in broken relationships, a broken relationship with God, a broken relationship with each other. We get isolated from God. He gets distanced and far away, and from each other. We've all had isolated, broken relationships which have separated us from people that we care very much about. It's what a virus does. That's what sin is. Sin is a virus that infects the human heart. It causes social distancing. It isolates us. It cuts us off from that which is most important, our relationship with God and our relationship with each other. The scriptures teach that all of us have a virus, a spiritual virus, a spiritual alienation from God, and it's only once we get that relationship healed and restored back together again can we truly have healthy relationships in this world. That separation from God is so deadly that it can kill us ultimately and can kill our relationships with each other. And interestingly, there is no known human cure. Only God can cure the human heart. Only God can provide the antidote, the vaccine. It is his Son, Jesus Christ. When I was doing tours of the Reformation to Germany, we took an afternoon to go to Buchenwald, the German concentration camp outside of Weimar. Not everybody could go. It's a very ghastly place. It's a horrible place. Well, in the Holocaust Museum in Boston, there's the picture and a note of a woman by the name of Goethe Weissmann Klein. In 1939, she wrote a book, All But My Life. And in it, she describes the story of her relationship with her best childhood friend, Ilse, who was in that concentration camp with her as children. And she describes an afternoon where Ilse found a raspberry in the camp that one of the soldiers or guards had dropped. And she tucked it away and she hid it. She carried that raspberry all day long because there was nothing to eat there. There was no grass there because the people said if there was grass here, we would have eaten it, every single blade of grass. So Ilsa carries this raspberry in her pocket all day long to present that night to me, to give to me her raspberry. You see, the real measure of the value of a gift is the cost in the giving of it. Now imagine a world in which your entire possession is one single raspberry, and you carry it and you hide it all day long, and you don't eat it of it yourself or taste of its sweetness and of its goodness, but you carry it so that that night in the dark you can give it to your best friend. Ilsa gave that raspberry to me. All she had, she gave to me. And Goethe said, I have never eaten a raspberry since that moment that I didn't think of Ilsa and her gift to me. And this is what God is doing on the cross. This is what Jesus is doing. He is giving his life for your life and mine. And as he's doing so, he says, don't forget forgiveness, and don't forget care and comfort and consolation one for another. On the cross, Jesus speaks this third final word of his about comfort and consolation and what relationship is to look like. He says, I understand you, I provide for you, I'll give for you everything I possibly can. Receive it, open up, let go. You're not in charge of the world. You're not in control. Just let go and let me. Give whatever you have, whatever burden it is, over to me. Because you know what? I already see what you know and what you need. I see that already. He saw that in Mary and John before they even made a request. He knew their deepest needs. And he said, you have a great need for me to die on the cross to reconcile you to God. And you have a great need for me to bring you together and to provide deep, whole, tender, intimate, caring relationships between one another. Who would not want those two great gifts that God carries around with him to give to you and to me?